All right, the ceremonial making of the thumbnail faces. Danny, Kristaps Porzingis, first half.
The Dallas Mavericks assist total overall.
Jaylen Brown's third quarter defense. All right, let's do a podcast. Welcome on to Dunc'd On after game one of the 2024 NBA Finals is in the books. Boston had a little bit of sphincter tightening in the third quarter, but ultimately pulled away in dominant fashion. Want to remind you, if you're listening on the public pod, you can go ahead and jump in and grab our free trial once again. So hopefully we can earn your business with that this time. So please give that a shot. Same if you're watching on YouTube, and of course a subscribe or like or just a recommendation to someone you know that loves basketball would be much appreciated. So I think maybe the way to go through this, Danny, is chronological order, some of the big things that stuck out in this game as we kind of went through it, and then we can try to make sense of it all at the end.
Sure, I think that's a reasonable course of action, and one that sounds better to the Boston Celtics because that first quarter was an absolutely dominant display by them, and it encapsulated a couple of really important dynamics, some of which toned down over the course of game one, but were still present in important parts of the story of this game and where the series moves. And so there are kind of two that I thought were the most pressing from the early going. One of which was the availability and play of Kristaps Porzingis, where he did not start, but he came off the bench and was an absolute destroyer in that first quarter. I said that he was the best player on the floor overall in the first quarter. Porzingis, 11 points, 4 of 6 from the field, also 3 rebounds. I don't think he had any of his. Oh, he did have 2 blocks then. He had some blocks that had some rim protection then. And so, while I think that Porzingis' offensive display was non-representative just because he made some really, really tough shots, we've always said that part of what Porzingis adds to the Celtics is that he raises both their floor and their ceiling because he gives them a really good rim protector. He's a huge dude out there, but he also provides a lot of that dynamism offensively because he's a guy that you have to guard and everything else. And so, because he's coming back from a calf injury, hadn't played in 38 days, wanted to know what Porzingis was going to be like. And he was great. The Celtics were phenomenal, plus 16 in his 7 minutes in the first quarter.
Yeah, and then he also continued the assault early in the second as they build the 20-point lead. It even got up as high as 29 in the first half. And yeah, I thought Porzingis, he was 4 of 4 on mid-rangers in the first half. A couple of them he got separation either via an elbow or a blow to the midsection and got an open one. But, he wasn't really getting great position. That's what I was hoping, is that he would duck in a little bit more. They kind of went to him and just straight ISOs, and he hit a couple of really tough ones. And then he also banged a couple of very deep threes, which I have more confidence in his ability to continue to do. And of course, he provides a bunch of spacing. And then the rim protection was excellent as well by him. And the strategy to largely keep him out of the pick and roll worked. They did a lot of pre-switching. Of course, they put him on PJ Washington or Derek Jones Jr. And those guys are much more vulnerable, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say vulnerable, but they're just not as good of rollmen. They can't get up above the square and crush dunks. And if Jones Jr. does it, he just is not as used to that. And then also you have another big standing under the basket usually, so it can get really crowded in the lane. And so Porzingis was largely able to stay out of the action. He got cooked a couple of times by Luka, but nothing too bad on switches or in a drop coverage when they did succeed in making his man the screener and getting him involved in the action. But they avoided that a lot of the time. And so he was able to be a big problem around the basket for Dallas, which took only 6 shots at the rim. And they did in the first half, and they did not have an alley-oop during the competitive portion of the game after they've crushed more than 50 of those through their run to this point. So I thought both in terms of him not getting stuck on the perimeter too much and being able to be a massive force defensively around the basket. That was important. And then, of course, the way he spaced the floor was big as well. And I thought he moved just fine. His stamina looked just fine. What did you think of the decision to not start him?
It was intriguing because you thought if he's not good enough to start, maybe he's not good enough to play, but he did look fine out there. And it could have been about managing his minutes that could feel differently in a game that was closer or that, anything else, because they, generally speaking, Boston played so well in his minutes. But keeping it manageable and running through everything else, I think
matching him up with Lively too. I think
yes,
it seemed like they at a number of points were making a relatively concerted effort to do that. I think there are a couple of reasons behind that. One was that the Mavs were more likely going to switch defensively with Lively on the floor, and then they could use Porzingis's perceived switch busting, which again, I don't think is going to be a massive weapon in this series. I did that film analysis of him at the end of March, beginning of April. And, I thought that a lot of what he was doing was kind of cheap stuff. And also, like, he wasn't, like, he shot contested 17-footers, right? Like, if he's ducking in on guys, getting to, like, the dotted line for his little jumpers, then I might have felt differently about it. But I think that, that's part of why they had him in there. He's also a superior shooter to Horford, so they wanted to have more shooting on the floor. But obviously, it seems like he's going to be able to beat Kristaps Porzingis in this series. And for a game one, when he hasn't played in over a month, that is clearly the biggest takeaway here.
It is, and Porzingis is also connected with the other big takeaway from the other biggest takeaway from game one, which he's connected to, which is Boston plays with 5-out spacing. And there are a lot of different ways that it can challenge a defense. And there are a lot of opportunities they create. And, over the year, we've phrased this differently, but one of them is you're going to have an advantage somewhere. And also the help is not going to be coming from, the help isn't going to be as close. And to me, that's the thing that will carry over more than like Porzingis hitting mid-rangers beyond game one, is not only that you have this spacing, which affects the help. That means that when Boston can beat their man one-on-one, a lot more danger happens for the Mavericks, whether it's that person yamming a dunk or it's creating an open three somewhere else because the person just has to come further away. And Boston was better attacking one-on-one overall in game one than I expected.
Yeah, and I think that was most clear. We're kind of violating our chronological order here as they went on that 14-0 run at the end of the third, where it was Jason Tatum blowing by Derek Lively and or Brown getting into the lane. Those are the most common ones. And those guys were making pretty good rim reads. They were setting guys up for corner threes. They were getting the churn going. Boston is pretty good in those situations. Or when it was there, they were just finishing at the basket as well. They opened up a couple of offensive rebounds as well off of their misses. And so, yeah, Kleba, like we thought Luka might struggle, but I only thought he was going to struggle maybe in one matchup, which was against Brown. And Brown did cook him pretty well. And then, Tatum blew by Kleba. He was getting by Lively. I thought Lively could defend. I think Lively can do a better job against him in individual defense, just with a different approach. Like Dallas really came out trying to pressure a ton at the start of the third. That's part of how they got back into it. But then I think Boston did well to turn that against them and drive right by them. So I think Lively going to more of a contain approach against Tatum and force him to shoot jumpers could be useful. But yeah, I mean, then there was, Kleba wasn't as good as expected. Luka got beat up pretty well. You had Jrue Holiday going right past PJ Washington and just scoring on him at the rim, even when he has a 6-inch height advantage on Jrue Holiday. Or Jrue Holiday going right past Derrick Jones Jr. for a foul. Even Tatum beating Derrick Jones Jr. a few times. And is that because those guys are that good? Are they so much better than some of the other guys that they've gone up against? I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think it's more just the spacing, where Dallas had much more of a shell in previous series, and you just had guys a step further away on some of their digs and some of their gaps. And that's why Boston was able to be so effective getting that initial penetration.
You brought it up during the live call, but it was especially apparent with Luka, where like Luka was what he was conceding in many circumstances. There was like one play with Jaylen Brown where the first effort from Luka was actually very good. and he stopped him. But then Brown had enough juice for a second attempt, and the help was coming from further away. And so instead of it being like a contested by Lively or Gafford shot, I think in that case it was a made two, like a made layup, not a dunk. Though Jaylen Brown had some nice plays in this one. And so the geometry of the floor, the dynamics of the help are very different against the Boston Celtics than they are against other teams. And you and I thought that was going to be a bigger part of the story in the Oklahoma City series. And it wasn't, in part because of just Dallas was able to handle things differently in that series. But the dynamism of Boston's offensive players, both as shooters, but also as ball handlers and creators, it forces different choices. And I wonder if Jason Kidd and the Mavericks are going to evaluate some of those threats differently in game 2 and beyond. And I think one of the other really telling elements of this, I brought up how, actually, maybe I didn't bring this up, but I wanted to, about kind of the shot distributions. And we'll use just the first half, though a lot of these dynamics carried on. The Dallas Mavericks, Luka Doncic is an unbelievable corner three generator. In the first half, the Dallas Mavericks took one corner three. And that one corner three was Kyrie Irving. Luka took one that was really close to being a corner three, but wasn't classified that way. Kyrie took one in the corner and he missed it. In the first half, the Boston Celtics generated 9, made 4 corner threes, and they were getting wide open shots. And so even though we brought up how Porzingis' attempts, those were non-representative potentially, like the overall success rate, Boston, not only were their corner threes clean, they're above the break threes were clean. And so Boston, I brought up that the 9 corner threes they had, Boston took 27 threes and 17 twos in the first half.
Yeah, that's a crazy number. And I thought Dallas, even when they closed out and maybe thought they were there, where they would have been there in previous series, like Kristaps Porzingis is just going to fire from 29 feet, and he's 7'3", and Derek White is going to get his shot off with great shot prep amazingly quickly, and Sam Hauser is going to catch the ball above his head, never bring it below his forehead, and bang a corner three. Like, they are just very aggressive getting these threes off. You really have to be there against these guys. A lot of them have pretty good size as well. So that was really, I think, an adjustment for Dallas. And particularly the fact that Boston goes 7 of 15 from 3 in the first quarter, that 37-point first quarter. And Dallas does defend pretty well after that, but I do think that they still were a little bit more concerned about the 3 after that, and that enabled Boston to get enough penetration. But I still think and the big problem mostly for Boston was 6 points in the first half of the third quarter or so.
Yeah,
after that, things seemed to run pretty well, and obviously the fourth was relative garbage time. But they put up only 107. Like, this wasn't some like unsustainably bad defensive performance from Dallas by any means.
It helped that Boston didn't make their threes at the same rate after that first quarter. But yeah, overall, Boston 115 offensive rating, 95.5 first shot half court, though they had a 189 in transition, which is ridiculous per cleaning the glass. And yeah, I mean, there were a few guys like Peyton Pritchard missed a number of them at other points in time. And I agree with you on the general concept that they defended better. And to put the numbers on some of that, the overall run. So at the second half of the first quarter, the Celtics went on a 23-5 run. If you expand out the time horizon on the back end, which included that Porzingis push at the beginning of the second quarter, it goes to 44-16. And so if you look at the overall numbers, you're like, oh man, they had that kind of run and had it close. Like, it was an outlier, but it was an outlier in ways that could perpetuate. And so I thought that overall after that, Dallas, they improved defensively, and then some of their offense looked better when they weren't taking the ball out of the basket every time, even if there were still plenty of flaws. And one of the other players I wanted to bring up that had a really challenging game overall was Derek Lively. Lively has had a phenomenal playoff so far. He has been the best Mavericks center. And it was a mix of being very limited offensively. Derek Lively only took 1 shot from the field in his 18 minutes and then 2 free throws, both of which he missed. He made the field goal. And he got fouled on a kind of an alley-oop, and my frustration is that those aren't shooting fouls. But he got fouls in quick succession in the third quarter and went on tilt, like in a way that I haven't really seen as much from him. And Lively was getting very frustrated. And it's easy to think of this as a young guy thing, because in part it is. he was getting frustrated by foul calls, and he kept on like acting like they were bad calls, and they were 100% correct. Jaylen Brown was driving into him. Derek Lively wasn't being vertical, and he was getting called for a foul.
Yeah, I mean, and definitely he was not able to have the same effect as a rim protector. He's less effective as a switch guy. Didn't do anything on the offensive glass during his time either, and was in foul trouble. And Gafford also, I thought, really struggled defensively in this game. They don't really want to switch him on the perimeter the way they want to with Kleba and Lively. And the fact that they went with the 5 out with Kleba, which they have largely avoided towards the end of the first half, kind of showed how effective Boston was being. I want to get into more about how Boston shut down Dallas's offense, though, with only 89 points. They didn't have more than 24 points in any quarter. And Luka was pretty good, 30 points, but still 12 out of 26. Not amazing. A few of these other stats here are pretty crazy. During the competitive portion of the game, Luka Doncic made 4 threes. He was 4 of 12. One other Maverick made a 3-pointer. Kyrie was 0 for 5. I thought he can definitely play better. Like, he missed some good looks, but they largely made his life pretty difficult. And that was kind of what I predicted. I thought that Drew would do a pretty good job on him. Jaylen Brown does a pretty good job on him. And, they've got a lot of good help defense against him, too. I thought it was interesting they're playing a drop coverage on Kyrie. I think the Mavs should explore that more, regardless of who's setting the screen. If they're going to, if it's Jones or Washington that Porzingis is on, then you might as well just, like, set that screen and let Kyrie shoot a 3. Like, that's good offense. But I thought there was actually one play that was telling to me actually, it was a mistake by Boston where Al Horford kind of my-batted on Irving. And it was a play where Irving attacked Horford. Horford switched on him. Horford was largely effective as a switch defender in this game. And then Irving blows by Horford on the baseline. He raises his hand. I was sort of like, okay, why did he do that? What did he fail to execute? And then I realized that one pass away towards the top is Drew Holiday standing at the elbow. And they largely did a pretty good job of sending guys into the help. I think this was the best game that I've seen by a team defensively taking advantage of the Mavs not having amazing shooting, particularly above the break. So they just did a great job of being at the elbows. So that's one thing that they did. The other thing, Luka obviously is the bigger problem. They were willing to switch anybody other than Porzingis on a Luka, and even Porzingis on occasion. And they didn't really go for 2 on the ball with Porzingis on Luka. Like, Luka went right by him on that. So they kind of went away from that. But what they're doing is, of course, Porzingis or Horford is not guarding the center. So if Luka wants to go at the center, you got to set the screen with Derek Jones Jr. or PJ Washington or Josh Green, whoever of those guys the center is guarding. And with Horford, they were willing to switch, but then there's not a ton of shooting there, right? You've got the guy who just set the screen, like, okay, he's not going to roll to the basket. There's already a center there. So now he's going to have to go above the break. And they're like, okay, we'll just help off of that guy above the break. Like, we're going to help one pass away off of PJ Washington or Derek Jones Jr. above the break. And all right, maybe we can rotate out of that or whatever. And if we feel like we need to, or we're going to make those guys shoot above the break threes. And considering that the non-Luka Mavs made 1 3 in the game, I would say that worked. And then same thing if there was, most of
I was thinking,
then,
Nate, I was thinking about the play so it was Drew Holiday on PJ, and it was at the top. It was at the top of the key, and so PJ Washington is the closest Maverick to Luka Doncic. And so Luka's driving pretty much to the free throw line. I think Jaylen Brown was on him. And so Drew Holiday is basically able to defend 2 players at once because he's able to slow down Doncic's drive, but also not concede an open shot by a shooter that you're scared of in that position. And so there's a part of this that Jason Kidd could improve by just like putting guys in the right spots. But the problem is the Mavericks, they have these like capable corner 3-point shooters. And sure, if PJ Washington is going to hit them at the rate that he did at points in that Oklahoma City series, then it's a different conversation. But they don't. But
he's not in the corner. That's
exactly
huge, right?
He's not physically in the corner, and they don't have the shooters that Boston does. And so, and Luka Doncic understands that as good as anyone does, if not better. And so Dallas isn't generating as big of an advantage, and Boston isn't conceding as much. So there are things in that area that Dallas can improve, but there are constraints in that area that Dallas can only improve so much.
And the configuration that Dallas kind of likes to be in offensively is pick and roll, big lob catching center sets the screen for Luka or Kyrie. And then the other one of those two guys is the one pass away guy above the break. And then you've got Washington and Jones Jr. in the corner. Like, that's a lot of their actions are like that. And those guys are capable from the corners, and they've largely made those shots. And yeah, like Jones Jr. and PJ have made above the break some. But when you force those guys to be the screener for Luka, now that's kind of messed up. You're not as worried about those guys above the break, number one. And then also, now your spacing's pretty compacted too if you also have Kyrie above the break as well. And then you also have the center just standing under the basket because he can't stand anywhere else. He can't space to the corner. So it becomes much harder to get, an alley-oop to a Derrick Jones Jr. And also I thought like those guys just couldn't finish, right? Like Boston was brilliant protecting the rim against PJ Washington and against Derrick Jones Jr. Jaylen Brown, Porzingis caused massive problems for those guys trying to finish around the basket, particularly in the second half. So just the overall spacing and positioning of the players in Dallas's offense are messed up. And that just, even if you're in a bad matchup, like a Peyton Pritchard on a Luka or something like that, you're keeping that shell and you can gap and you can help much more. Or even like one of their rules seemed like, all right, if Jones Jr. or PJ Washington is standing above the break, whoever's guarding them, just run to the nail as soon as Luka drives and actually like get in front of him. Make Luka just throw a pass back over his head out to this guy and we'll deal with that and we can close out on him. And they really caused quite a few problems, I thought, for Dallas's offense. And I want to see what the counters are going to be to that.
There will definitely be some, and also Dallas hitting better than 26% of their threes will make some of that look better. But my concern, as somebody who picked Dallas to win this series, is that better might not be enough, because even though this wasn't the greatest Boston offensive performance, and even though, the first quarter was ridiculous, but everything else, there are improvements that Dallas can make. And then one of the other ones, which we did see in the second half to an extent, is the hustle, getting to loose balls, playing more physical on defense. Those things.
Yeah, their biggest reason for hope is that for the first 22 minutes of the game, they played like shit. That's their biggest reason for hope. They just they were awful. And Dallas can absolutely win games in this series with just the play harder, play better adjustment. Yeah.
But Boston's offense at times can be better than it was. And so I wanted to pull out a couple other threads from the remainder of the game. And the one I want to start with, because I think it was more inspiring to me than the other one, was Jaylen Brown had some preposterous plays in this game, including he had a dunk where he went through 4 Mavericks on the play. He drove past 2, and then he dunked on 2, which was an astonishing play by him. And then, in some ways, almost as impressive as that, Jaylen Brown had 2 gargantuan help defense rim protection blocks in the third quarter, which not his forte. Jaylen Brown is a very good defender. That's just not what he does well. And I think one of them was on PJ Washington, and then the other one was on
3.
He had 3.
He blocked an alley-oop to Derrick Jones Jr. Then he blocked him again on the same possession. Then he blocked Kyrie coming over too. Yeah.
And so, to see Jaylen Brown have that kind of performance, he had a nice game overall. 22 points, 7 to 12 from the field. A little bit better if he didn't miss 5 free throws. He was 6 of 11 overall on that. Also had a couple of good passes. It's the Jaylen Brown mixed bag when he has the ball in his hands, of like a couple of good passes, a couple of nice drives, and then a couple of just bad ones. But he had that one to the corner that was really nice. He had a couple of various plays. But Jaylen Brown, I thought that we thought he had the best ability to get downhill. And there were times that looked really, really good. But the help defense was a big surprise for me.
Yeah. No, and he was that play where or that possession where he stopped Jones twice was really massive. And I thought that change the momentum of the game a lot as they go into that 14-0 run. So yeah, he was probably the best player on the floor. Cue the who should be Finals MVP, Tatum or Brown discussions here, but yeah, 22 points, 7 to 12, just very efficient. The only thing he did is he didn't make free throws, and I thought he only took maybe one bad shot. He took like a jab step 3 in transition as the Mavs were making their run at the start of the third. Yeah, I'm trying to think of so.
Oh, I have another one. If you want.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah,
Jason Tatum, and so at times his holds it game was very frustrating, and I thought that that was an especially egregious part of Boston letting go of the thread a little bit at the beginning of the second half, where they were just playing too casually. There was a play where Luka was down and they didn't push it in transition, and Tatum was satisfied going for the mid-ranger times. But when Tatum attacked, and it was particularly, I thought some of his best moments were when they got lively on a switch. Those looked really good, and it leads to this true frustration with Tatum, which is just, why in the world aren't you doing this more often? Because I don't think of it as a conserving energy thing. I think it's just that's not the way he likes to play. And at some point, and maybe it's going to be this series, he can break from it because it does him and the Celtics no favors.
No, that's true. And whenever he attacked quickly, I thought he did pretty well. In general, you want to just go downhill at Luka very quickly if you're using him as the defender in pick and roll. And there's all these numbers, like with the Porzingis post of, Luka just like unbelievable in isolation defense. And like, okay, let's see what happens against the Celtics. And when you really have to guard on an island, I think a lot of those numbers are a big credit, not only to him. I mean, I think he's defending within his capabilities pretty well. Although I thought he was bad in the first half, along with the rest of the Mavs, frankly. But when he doesn't have all that rim protection and guys can make multiple attacks at him, it's going to look a lot worse for him in particular. I want to enumerate a little bit more of what I meant when I said Dallas played like shit in the first. I mean, they just were getting beaten to every loose ball in the first quarter. That was one of the biggest things. I mean, they just had like Kyrie had a turnover where he just threw it into the backcourt. He definitely had some pretty weird plays. Luka got his dribble picked 4 times in this game, which is very, very rare. Now, some of those were very nice plays, but Luka Doncic just like 3 of those were just like one-on-one getting it taken away. Like one in the second half was White coming and getting him from behind after Pritchard switched onto him. Another play where they helped off of the non-threatening screener at the top of the key. So it was just not a very good game by Luka and the Mavs. I think Luka also had a few plays where he's like trying to throw the ball to the corner and the Mavs will probably need to look at the film a little bit more and see what's open. Like some of those corner threes are open. But this is not a good shooting team. And it surprised me. Like Luka is so brilliant and the lob catchers are so brilliant. And then, Jones and Washington made enough, but again, that's mostly from the corners and mostly on closeouts, driving closeouts where they've been pretty good. But, and also going up against guys who are weak links, and the Celtics really don't have any defensive weak links. That's just so incredibly important going against Dallas. So, I think Dallas could play better. I would actually, Luka going at Tatum is something I would be exploring a lot more.
Yeah,
as well.
It wasn't as extreme as some of the criticism I laid at Tatum in the Pacers series, but his one-on-one defense wasn't that good in this game when he was really challenged.
Yeah. Any other kind of like matchups that you would be trying to exploit for either team?
More Jaylen Brown defended by Luka as the Celtics. I think that it worked well when they got to it. It also forces Luka to work defensively, and with where the help is coming from, can go to that a little bit more. As the Mavericks, I think that it's not something they ever do very often, but I would be interested in doing, maybe you even do some Spain stuff with Kyrie involved in the screening action. I think that would be just to see how the Celtics would defend it. Maybe you force some miscommunications. Like the Celtics have the personnel to do extremely well, but maybe you could just get them discombobulated.
I guess the issue there is, they could just switch everything, right? Because
they can,
you can't,
but
because you can't run a Spain pick and roll and also have another guy in the dunker spot, right? Like you got to have the corners filled there. So you would have to use the center, and then in theory they can just switch. And it wouldn't be too much. You might get a miscommunication here and there.
Yeah.
But no, I feel you. And like you go through all of these options. You're like, yeah, well, but like, they still have this big center who's there. And I don't think that playing Kleba is a panacea. Maybe he has a game in this series where
I think you just challenge Kleba to shoot. Like, of course. You treat Kleba like we said the Pacers should have treated Horford in the last series. Like you just don't treat him as the spacer that that you might think he is. And you just don't compromise your defense for it.
And Kleba also really gives a place for the center to hide out, I think, even more on Boston.
Yeah, and so on that front, Dallas took 6 shots in the restricted area in the entire first half. They did get 5 of 10, though some of that was on offensive rebounds in the third quarter. But it's, again, this idea that Boston can take away some of the threes without conceding anything around the basket. And so it saps away some of the offensive foundation for the Dallas Mavericks, where they're not getting those lobs, they're not getting anything else. And you could say, like, because there have been points in the series, incidentally, we criticized Oklahoma City at points for this, where defense is about, I always phrase it, defense is about choices and offense is about making the defense make bad choices they don't want to make. And what Boston, because of their personnel, can do is they can take things away without sacrificing what most teams have to sacrifice. And that's a big part for me of why having Porzingis available is so important, is because now they have the rim protection, but they don't have to sell out to make sure that Dallas doesn't get stuff around the basket. Whereas all of these other teams of various different stripes, the Wolves are one hell of a defense. Oklahoma City had a really good defense overall this year.
Clippers did too, honestly.
Clippers did too. And they don't have all of this together. And remember, those teams were very healthy overall. It's not like the pathway that Boston did. And so the Celtics are a different animal defensively. They're crackable, they're beatable, but it's harder to do. In some ways, there's a weird parallel between them and the Mavericks offense, where it's like, they're not perfect, but beating them requires more than maybe anyone else.
No, and just like maybe you can point to, oh man, all right, this individual player isn't, just like completely unstoppable like a Tatum or something. But yeah, I mean, just the overall depth, the overall system, they're healthy right now, which is massive. And yeah, I mean, this is just, they have a lot of talent on this team, and just so few guys who have weaknesses. And then I think the Celtics just played a smarter game. They played smarter.
They were more
really
prepared.
Good job of they did a really, more prepared in the sense that they came out, with a better mindset. And there's talk that this is the first finals for everyone on Dallas except for Kyrie. I think that's literally true. And then for Boston, everybody except for Porzingis has been here before. And, maybe that was actually another reason to bring him off the bench, let him just kind of feel more comfortable in the environment. So, I did think Boston showed generally more poise, more aggressiveness. They stuck to the game plan better. They had fewer mistakes. And yeah, I just really liked their game plan. I really liked what they were willing to give up. Anytime you're giving up, just like, they had 6 assists through 3 quarters, and they were only 1 off the NBA Finals record for fewest assists, and they were 2 fewer assists with 9 than any regular season game this year.
Yep.
Which is crazy. Like when you said it was 1999 was the only game that was fewer assists than this, it's like that's like back in the Stone Age.
Yeah,
like it was just incredible.
So you want to know a little bit about that game, because I still have the box score up from the second screen experience. That was Spurs 80, Knicks 67. And the Knicks were 2 of 14 from 3 in that game. It was a very different era. And so it's it's not the dead ball era, but in some ways for relative to the current one, it feels that way. And so, yeah, of course it's different. And as we said, the Mavs hitting more than 7 3-pointers would have helped that, and Luka having 4 of those, because the Lukas are less assisted than the average Maverick. One other Mav that I want to talk about briefly. You and I posited this before, and his numbers end up being better because of some garbage, but Jaden Hardy could have some real challenges in this series. He doesn't have as many places to attack, have as many advantages. So I didn't think he was terrible. It was just a reminder of, it's harder sledding against the Celtics than it is for him against the teams where he really did thrive. And I mean, Jason Kidd, great job pushing that button when he did in the Nuggets series. I think Hardy's going to struggle against the Celtics.
Or in the Thunder series.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might be the case.
Sorry.
I mean, there's just a higher level of intelligence that's needed, I think, to play against this Boston team. And certainly Dallas can be better. Like, they'll make more shots. Kyrie's going to make more shots. I don't foresee him having a great series because I don't think it's a great matchup for him, but he'll be better than he was tonight for sure. And they'll get more comfortable. These guys will get more comfortable being the role men that they don't necessarily want to be the role men. And I also think Luka, I know he took 26 shots, but I think he can be even more aggressive, particularly in that upper paint area where they are not really reacting to him that much. And I thought his third quarter was pretty good. And particularly when Porzingis is out of the game, I think he just needs to go right to the basket against whoever's guarding him and get into the lane and score enough that you force the Celtics to start overreacting to you, which I don't think they did in this game. And part of that was he just didn't make that many shots, particularly early, and then they're up by a lot, so they didn't want to give up threes and let him back in it. I got a couple of adjustments here for you, but unless you had anything else.
Let me take a look through my notes.
Well, I'll say one of mine right now. I'd like to see... Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'd like to see some white Porzingis pick and roll, and then because Kyrie is guarding White most of the time, so I'd like to see then Porzingis trying to duck in on Kyrie Irving, and you can just kind of throw it up to him in that circumstance. I think Porzingis going against him, he can actually get to a spot, and if Kyrie tries to front him, then you can just throw it over the top. I want Porzingis to be closer to the basket. I also thought Tatum had some decent success using his size against Kyrie as well. So I think that's something that they could look at a little bit more.
One of the more impressive plays for me of the game, and this is, again, it was a different kind of one for Porzingis. I think this was in his second stint. It was late in the first stint. Porzingis had Lively on him above the break and just does a straight isolation drive, mostly right to left, and just straight up beats Derek Lively. I was not expecting that.
Yeah, that was surprising. And Lively, again, could play a lot better. And Dallas,
Sure.
they came out much more aggressively and physically in the third quarter. They'll need to bring that level of intensity for the entire game. And what about player usage for Dallas? Any changes there?
This isn't a great Daniel Gafford series. I think that really, to me, even though Lively had a rough game one, I think part of the reason he needs to start is because the way that the center minute should be apportioned for me is Lively's getting half or maybe more than half, and then you're doing some Kleep at the 5 and some Gafford. And so in order to get that balance right, you typically have to start the guy who's getting the most minutes, especially in some ways if he's closing for you, which, knowing what we know right now, my expectation should be that Lively's closing close games, even if he was great.
Yeah, I regretted actually that one of my predictions for the series wasn't that Gafford would at some point be out of the starting lineup. And I don't know if it happens in game 2, but certainly if they lose game 2, it'll happen in game 3. Let's see, what else did I have? I just thought Boston's communication defensively was just on point. They've been practicing this system for a very long time, and they've done they did a lot of great pre-switching stuff. And then when Dallas kind of tried to do the same, right, there was one possession right at the end of the third in which Gafford tries to stay closer to the basket. So Hauser sets a screen for Gafford's man to go out to the corner, and Gafford points out, okay, whoever is guarding Hauser, you go out to the corner. I'm going to stay close to the rim. And then Boston immediately has Hauser, who's an excellent pick and pop shooter, go sprint up, set the screen for Jaylen Brown, and Jaylen Brown bangs the three as Gafford was too slow getting up there. So they're just, I think Boston just has a little bit, I mean, as good as Dallas has been in terms of some of these little machinations to keep the big close to the rim, I think Boston has been doing this for almost 3 years now.
And sort of along those lines with the limitations of players, another benefit of having Porzingis available, Boston ran during the competitive portion of this game an 8-man rotation. They ran Brown, Tatum, Horford, Holiday, White, Porzingis, Pritchard, Sam Hauser. There are not weak points really in that rotation. I mean, Hauser can have some defensive limitations at times, though he was great.
We thought Pritchard or Hauser or Horford were going to get cooked, and they really just didn't. But again, really. I go back to the spacing, right? Like I think that if you're just saying the Dallas individual creators against the guy who is guarding him one-on-one, those Dallas matchups are actually better than Boston on the other side. But Boston has the floor totally spaced they play 8 shooters that you really have to respect, although I still think the Mavs could maybe do a little bit better job on Horford, right? Like if Horford sets a screen, I think they should be in a drop. Porzingis, probably not, but so yeah, I think that was or even go ahead.
No, and so like Luke Cornett, totally credible basketball player, didn't play a minute in the competitive portion. O'Shea Brissett didn't play a competitive minute, and we got asked if over under on Svi minutes, and he went over 3. So, but they don't need Boston if they're healthy. They can make it through with those players, and their starting 5 is great. But if they can get this 8 and just not have to rely on the level of player, like, I mean, we saw Jason Kidd dust off Tim Hardaway Jr. at one point. He's more flawed than any of those Celtics guys. And Josh Green has his moments, but he has his limitations as well. Hardy. And so most teams don't have the luxury of having their worst rotation player being as good as the Celtics do.
Yeah, I'm trying to think for Kidd. Hardaway Jr., I don't love him in this series because he's another, but we're not talking about like Kawhi Leonard going up against him. So he might actually kind of hold his own. And hey, if he's in there with Luka, maybe they just go after Luka anyway, and it doesn't matter as much that he's out there. But so maybe he can give them just another quick trigger on the perimeter who can get hot. I mean, I still think part of the reason they've been so good in these playoffs is that they've minimized his role, but it's something to consider. Exum, I do like him because and it's been rare that he's played, obviously, and he hasn't hit shots, which of course you're going to have to do. But I do think that he gives them just another passer and decision maker.
Mm-hmm.
And when he is out there, the ball just moves faster around the perimeter. So I certainly
have an idea on that.
A shot.
I'd like to see Exum play in the Pritchard minutes and heat up the ball a little bit, give them a little bit more ball movement. I think that could work.
Yeah, and Kleba, again, he took one shot, which was actually a fantastic finish on Porzingis, but not one I would consider particularly repeatable. He was negative 15 in 19 minutes. And that was, I don't think that he was really that good of an offensive player. Like, he's really going to have to prove it. So, there's kind of 2 things that I think just general philosophies for the Mavs. One is, all right, we're going to throw it to you guys, Jones Jr. and Washington and Gleba. We're going to look at the film. You guys are open about the break. Go ahead and take as many of those as you want. Or option 2 is, Luka, you need to just go completely crazy, and that's going to crack things open for us a little bit more. You want to hit some comments here?
Sure. I could just do this one quickly. Got asked about whether this Celtics run, if they win the championship, would be the easiest run of the Dunc'd era. And statistically, the answer is yes. That doesn't mean it's any less of a banner or anything else. Dan Feldman's written about this well at the Daily Dunks. Zach Cram had a good piece for The Ringer as well. When you consider the teams they played and the players that are available, this has been there. Now, I don't think that the way of doing that necessarily fairly reflects the Mavericks because they were so much better in the second half of the year. But when you consider their pathway to this point, it would be. There are, the bubble stuff is different, anomalous, but I think that the pathway is there. But again, that means absolutely nothing. The banner hangs forever. They're a really, really good team. And we don't know where this series is going to go. But this game hopefully was a reminder to people that even if Boston had a soft path to this point, they're an incredibly talented team, and they were the best team in the league in the regular season.
Yeah, I'll respond to that when we take this one from Andy. That I think that regular season and being, a plus 11 net rating team can't be dismissed. And also, Dallas is a very good team. They beat a lot of good teams. I mean, Luka Doncic is like an all-time great player. Kyrie Irving is a totally championship vetted number 2. This idea that Dallas is like not a good team, I would give a lot of respect to Boston kicking the crap out of them. Now, was it a lot easier for them to get here? They didn't have to deal with their best player having a sprained knee, and maybe Luka will just not have that good of a series, but he had a great series against Minnesota, right? Like Minnesota, like Luka Doncic lit up what's supposed to be the best defense in the league, and what's also another one of the best defenses in the league in Oklahoma City. So, like, I think Dallas, and the way they played after the trade deadline, like Dallas is certainly a very worthy team to be here. Andy says, I'd like to see Dallas go a bit bigger with Kleba playing at the 4.
Maybe so that can give you a little bit more like supplemental protection, rim protection, all that kind of stuff. But it does make you easier to defend. I mean, Kleba's such a reluctant shooter. Remember, he's dealing with a shoulder injury. This isn't a random injury that he's 100% field. It affects his shooting and his willingness.
He's iffy in the best of times.
And so, as an option, sure. I mean, and for example, we saw Horford and Porzingis play together in this one. Like, you can make some of those things work. But it's it's an option, but I don't think it's a solve.
Well, and also Kleba to me has really just dropped off defensively from where he was 2 years ago, and certainly even maybe 4 years ago, where he doesn't provide really any rim protection anymore. We saw that when they went 5 out at the end of that game 4 against the Clippers. So I think like if that was the idea of like, okay, now we can switch lively on the perimeter and we still have another guy behind him, although again, that guy still has to guard a shooter, right? Like that's kind of the other problem. But yeah, and now if Washington and Jones just continue to kind of crap the bed on offense, and I mean Washington in particular was so bad, I thought on both ends in the first half, just not able to finish around the rim, missed some threes pretty badly, had some bad fouls, but then yeah, maybe you do look at that a little bit more. But I just don't think that this version of Kleba against this Boston team, I think he used to be one of our favorite players, and I think in some small doses maybe he still can be that guy. But Boston is just so set up to take advantage of any weaknesses where the drop off that he's experienced in basically kind of all areas is enough where I don't know how effective he can be. And I think the idea is just to stagnate their offense and put him at center rather than putting him at the 4.
Ben asked, do you think this the past couple of series in this one put a pause on the idea of big ball coming back? I'm still a believer, and I mean, you and John have talked about this extremely well overall in these playoffs, that credible 5 out spacing is the way that you can counter a lot of that kind of stuff. And so if you could do it, and it's hard to have the personnel, and then of course, if you have Jokic or you have somebody else, then you could definitely succeed there. But it's the idea that there are styles makes fights elements of this, but that there are certain counters or certain personnel groupings that you could get to that are just more likely to succeed than others. But it's a really hard part. You know how many teams play 5 shooters as good as the Celtics other than the Celtics? Zero.
Yeah. And, I think in a different matchup like Denver, I thought Boston had a lot more trouble guarding them, right? And I don't know that Denver's defense was much worse against the Celtics than the Mavs is. Brandon says Porzingis was constantly getting catches in the area. He said they probably wouldn't throw it to him. As I noted, he was 4 for 4 on those twos, basically outside of 15 feet that were contested on little like post up ISO type of catches, and he would just take one dribble to his left. He goes to his left every time and hit it. And I just don't think that's going to continue. Like that's even for him, that's not like a high percentage shot. Like if he gets closer, if he could get some foul, like if he gets close enough where the guy is trying to like push him and lean on him, he can get some fouls or go up through his arm or shoot from like the dotted line, that I think would be sustainable. And we saw they only really went to him, I think, a couple times in the second half. One of them, Luka, just took the ball from him. I actually don't think that's like a massive advantage matchup, particularly again if he's getting the ball 21 feet from the basket. So yeah, I know what he did. I consider that foul money.
Yeah, Porzingis 1 for 4 from the field, -2 ± in the second half of game 1.
Let's see. How did the Celtics D succeed where so many, such as the Timberwolves, have failed? It all starts with the ability to put the center on someone else. But then here's why the Wolves couldn't do. I still think they should have exported anyway. But the other problem is you also have Karl Towns and Naz Reid out there. So if then that guy has to guard the center, and Luka can still get downhill out of a pick and roll there, or you get two in the ball. I still think they would have been better off with Gobert near the rim and like Lively coming downhill having to make a play. But I think that makes it much more difficult. Whereas Boston, they're willing to switch everybody except Porzingis, and they're trying to keep Porzingis out of the action. So you're switching. You're maybe not in a great matchup for yourself defensively, but you always still have Porzingis near the rim, which was not where Minnesota was able to be successful. And then I thought OKC was really good against them. They had a different approach most of the way, but they totally shut down Kyrie, and the role players did beat him some, but that was really an offensive loss for OKC. Like OKC, other than maybe in that game 5, like they defended well enough to win that series, like easily. I think they defended exceedingly well, but yeah, that's the difference for Boston. I think they're just generally more disciplined and just have a better understanding due to probably having more playoff experience and more veterans, honestly, of like, here is exactly what we're willing to give up. Here are the exact rules when this guy is standing here where we're going to help. And I just don't think Minnesota was quite disciplined enough. Oklahoma City, I think, wasn't disciplined or malleable enough offensively, more so. But yeah, Boston just executes better, and they also have, maybe for this particular matchup, better personnel.
Mm-hmm.
Any other ones here?
Those were the ones that popped to me.
There's one question that said, like, yeah, Dallas played terrible. Boston has peaked. I don't think that's true because Boston can just go completely crazy from 3. They didn't really do that in this game. So, like, you could have the barrage where they shoot 50% from 3. It was 7 of 15 in the first quarter, but then it was pretty pedestrian after that. And yeah, I felt like unless the way that Dallas can get better defensively, I think, is they just got to guard better individually. And maybe they do give up a little bit more help, and you're willing to give up even more threes. In the end, Boston shot 15 threes in the first. They only shot 42 for the game, in the first quarter, I should say. So I do think Dallas's defense was good enough to win the last 3 quarters, and they played really badly. So but I'm not going to say that like Boston can't play better. I think they can. All right, we done here?
I think we are.
All right, that was fun. Please, again, if you're listening on the public pod, consider subscribing to Dunc'd on Prime. You can at least get ad-free, and you get a free trial right now. So give that a shot for sure. We got the mock-off season coming up as well at the moment. So it's a great time going into the finals, the mock-off season, the draft, then the off season itself for being a Dunc'd on Prime subscriber. We'll talk to y'all next time.